Show's over, folks. And didn't October do a bang-up job? Crisp breezes, full-throated cries of migrating geese, low-floating coral moon. Nothing left but fool's gold in the trees. Did I love it enough? The full-throttle foliage while it lasted. Was I dazzled? The bees have up and quit their last-ditch flights of forage and gone to shiver in their winter clusters. Field mice hit the barns, big squirrels gorge on busted chestnuts. A sky like hardened plaster hovers. The pasty river, its next of kin, coughs up reed grass, fat as feather dusters. Even the swarms of kids have given in to winter's big excuse, boxed-in allure. TV's ricochet light behind pulled curtains. The days throw up a close sign around 4. The hapless customer who'd wanted something arrives to find lights out. A bolted door. Hello, and welcome to Words That Burn, the podcast taking a closer look at poetry. This week's poem is November by American poet Maggie Dietz. Another October has come and gone, and with it, the most tolerable form of winter rides off into the distance. October represents, at least to me, the very best aspects of a changing season. There is the clear delineation between summer and autumn, represented by some of the very finest amber, ochre and orange colour palettes that nature has to offer. That is especially true here in Ireland. The light in itself makes every fleeting moment, every skittering leaf, worthy of a photograph, a pause. There are a million moments to remember. Then finally it peaks with a festival of ancient origin that is as rife now with mischief and decoration as it was 100 years ago. In short, October is everything you could want to end a season. Sadly, it's got to end. And perhaps worse than that, it has to be followed. November is the hour of winter. That incredible colour palette is replaced with a cold steel aesthetic that bleeds days together to a gradient smear. The temperature plummets, the leaves say goodbye, and rustling is replaced with relentless wind. As for light, the little we get of it is brief and unsatisfying. No one would be blamed for wanting to hunker down and wait it out. It is this feeling of taking shelter that Maggie Dietz captures in her poem, November. Maggie Dietz has a real talent for gilding the everyday, and does so in much of her poetry not with the intention of raising it up or glorifying it, but rather with the hope of helping others to observe that glorious everyday too. Her mentor, and noted poet in his own right, Robert Pinsky, praised her prowess for capturing this feeling in her poetry. He stated, "Her achievement, and the source of excitement for her readers, is an urgent fidelity to both that surface and the underlying caves and rivers of the imagination." The surface he's referring to is the obvious aspect of any situation. The underlying, on the other hand, is what we find after we scratch the surface. This surface and underlying are always present in Dietz's work, and very much so in this poem. There is a fluid ballet of opposing images, juxtapositions and dichotomies at play. The imagery oscillates between stark November sights and glorious quiet moments of nature and warmth. The voice of the poem begins bombastically, like a declaration, but stumbles over quiet, introspective questions that sneak up and snag the speaker. The point of view is a pendulum between external observation of the world and quiet and an internal, existential investigation. It invites the reader, or the audience, to ponder the question, how do we deal with November? Throughout the poem, Dietz builds a documentary of November, with a flurry of accurate moments that make up a month. Each one observed and transcribed to verse effortlessly. While this sounds dangerously close to making a list, Dietz does so in a way that remains dynamic, never getting bogged down in the starkness it wishes to enshrine. Dietz sets that dynamic tone from the very first stanza. Show's over, folks, and didn't October do a bang-up job? Crisp breezes, full-throated cries of migrating geese, low-floating coral moon. The opening voice is that of a barman calling last orders, or a ringmaster winding down. It's there to signify an end, but does so with a comfortable familiarity. This is marked out by the phrase, folks. This feels like showman's patter, the well-worn script and beating heart of any performance. It's a perfect way to kick off an ode to a cyclical season. After all, October comes around over and over. We've been here before, and we'll be here again. It is a strange note of hope that isn't immediately obvious, but there is a comfort in a cycle. We have another October to look forward to next year, and isn't that great? As if to double down on why this is good news, the next line gives the month a rhetorical performance review. And didn't October do a bang-up job? Dietz pulls us, her readers, into the poem through collective address and rhetorical questions. It's a way to establish that October, and indeed November, is something we all have to deal with. The coming winter is a test, and we are all bonded in this shared trial of endurance. What follows from there is a testament to Maggie Dietz's incredible skill of description and imagery in poetry. Glorious October is snapshotted in verse. Crisp breezes, full-throated cries of migrating geese, low, floating coral moon. What it evokes is nothing short of awe-inspiring. It captures the gothic nature and odd majesty of that time of year. This poet's scenes are not static, but moving. Those breezes are a push of winds. Full-throated cries are the bellows of animals shaking sound waves and the furious beating of wings. Dietz's October is a rush of change. We might get swept away by this flurry of movement, if not for the gorgeous coral moon. A single frozen moment that brings the stanza to a gentle rest. It's important that the audience comes to pause here, as the next stanza becomes a touch more introspective, and Dietz wouldn't want us to miss it. Nothing left but fool's gold in the trees. Did I love it enough? The full throttle foliage while it lasted. Was I dazzled? The bees. The stanza is bookended by more observations on the natural world. The leaves that have managed to cling on are a paltry imitation of the once roaring ember palette of October. All that's left is fool's gold, and it is a sickly yellow. At the other end of the stanza is the briefest mention of bees. I adore the cleverness of this decision by Dietz, as, at a glance, it might seem as though the mention of bees seems almost shoehorned into the stanza, last minute. The reason for this is made clear in what's placed at the centre, however. The listing of natural occurrence is interrupted by a sudden question of gratitude and wonder. Did I love it enough? The full throttle foliage. While it lasted, was I dazzled? The speaker of the poem is unsure of whether or not they truly took stock of what they had or appreciated it before it was gone. The dwindling glory of autumn has left them reflective, and we feel, as readers, that thoughts like, did I love it enough or was I dazzled, might have a deeper universal echo. The speaker is examining far more than just leaves. The enjambment, bleeding of one line into the next in poetry, of that image of the bees, pulls our focus back to nature and directly into the next stanza. All this has the effect of mimicking a stream of consciousness, complete with its unwelcome and unbidden thoughts. In the next stanza, it is nature and flora and fauna that is bunkering down for the miserable rain of November. The bees have up and quit their last-ditch flights of forage and gone to shiver in their winter clusters. Field mice hit the barns, big squirrels gorge. Even bees, that famous symbol of industriousness, productivity and human imagination, have called it quits. They can struggle no longer and will hide for now. Dietz creates an image of those famous insects that directly evokes the shaking of trees in the winter breeze. It is a gorgeous bit of onomatopoeic writing. The whole world feels like it has gone to shiver in their winter clusters. These micro-observations come hard and fast in the poem, and as I said, are a testament to the mastery of descriptive writing that Maggie Dietz holds. Her ability to do so was once described by critic Jonathan Farmer as description as its own justification, lit by worries that the life in which such observation happens isn't worthy of attention. This is a beautiful turn of phrase that perfectly captures the importance of attention to the minutiae of life. It reinforces that if we don't pay attention to the little things, life can rush past us and seem mundane. In looking at the smaller details, it reinforces that life is worth living. This seems to be one of Dietz's great causes as a poet, to stand firmly as a champion of Socrates' famous utterance, "The unexamined life is not worth living." For the animals facing this November, though, they have no time to stop and smell the roses, and are instead focused on getting the hell out of Dodge. Field mice hit the barns, big squirrels gorge. That colloquial voice and informal casual tone for communication, hinted at by the carnival bark in the first stanza, makes a comeback in phrases like "hit the barns." That voice is there to avoid over-romanticizing the month. A real risk when you spend so much time describing nature in a poem. It's done with the intention of grounding the season. A colloquial voice creates a broad appeal, hoping to reach as many listeners as possible. It avoids the alienation of grand language. Again, this is intentional by Dietz, as November and its hardships is a problem we all face. The enjambment continues and carries us as an audience directly into the next stanza. Big squirrels gorge on busted chestnuts. A sky like hardened plaster hovers. The pasty river, its next of kin, coughs up reed grass, fat as feather dusters. The enjambment here makes me think of falling leaves. Each stanza is falling one after the other, mimicking the behaviour of trees and leaves they are describing. Natural imagery is the mainstay again. Squirrels feeding from those busted chestnuts. Then the grim November sky gets a moment to shine, or dull, as may be more appropriate. Dietz describes a sky like hardened plaster hovers. That cold grey sky that never seems to budge, the constant relentless static of winter, is there. Hovers is the perfect way to describe the sky we all look up at least in the parts of the world that go through significant seasonal change. All through winter, November, December and January, it can feel like we're looking at the same unchanging sky. It hovers. Even the rivers feel the emptiness of November. They change from sparkling veins of life in the summer to something ill and empty now. The river itself is coughing. The dead plant life that has withered is being heaved onto the banks, as it too tries to just get through winter. Before we continue this harrowing account of November, I have a favour to ask. If you've been listening and you're still listening to this episode, you might be enjoying it. If you are, please consider leaving me a review wherever you listen. It really does help to get the podcast out to more people. Even better, if you know someone who is also facing down November and you think they might find some solace in this, please consider sending it to them directly. With that being said, on with the episode. You may or may not have noticed a subtle rhyme scheme running through this poem. Each stanza is 3 lines long, also known as a terzet. I'm never really sure how to pronounce that one. But the last word in the first line of each stanza rhymes directly with the final line of each stanza, with the middle line receiving its own sound. For example, in stanza 1, it is dew, cries, moon. In the second, it is trees, foliage, bees. And in the third, it's forage, clusters, and gorge. Now, this is probably easier to see when you're looking at the poem. There's a link below in the description to do so, or you can check it out on Substack. But you'll notice that when we follow this type of structure, it is known as A, B, A, C, D, C, with each new rhyming sound receiving its own letter of the alphabet, and so on and so forth. But you may also now be listening to me saying, Ben, those are not obvious rhymes. Dew and moon are not the same. No, they are not. Maggie Dietz is using the wonderful technique of assonance to rhyme an internal sound, as opposed to an exact match for each one. Dew and moo, trees and bees is an obvious one, and then the GE sound at the end of forage and gorge. Sometimes it's obvious, and sometimes it's not. But all the same, it provides a wonderful lilting structure that mimics a falling leaf as it winds its way to the ground, at least in my opinion. It also has the added benefit of giving the poem a slightly cyclical feeling with repeated rhyming sounds coming again and again. It is a nice nod to the cyclical seasons being mentioned within this poem. The next stanza, of course, continues that elegant rhyme scheme and creates an echo of imagery from earlier in the poem. Even the swarms of kids have given in to winter's big excuse, boxed-in allure, TV's ricochet behind pulled curtains. The only thing that could hold a candle to the chaos and buzz, excuse the pun, of bees in human society is probably children. They too have given in to November's chill, their swarm more of a whispered murmur now. There is, in all this taking shelter, an acknowledgement that it's not all bad. November is, after all, winter's big excuse, the alibi we all give for missing a party in favour of a cosy night in, the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card for dodging social commitments before the unrelenting social trial that is December. It's just too grim out. I couldn't make it. Much better not to brave that November bite and surrender instead to the boxed-in allure. Dietz reminds us, though, that true warmth remains a distant memory in the 11th month of the year, as TVs ricochet their artificial glow around the walls and behind battened-down curtains. Humanity is beautifully observed here by Dietz. She is acknowledging that we are creatures of comfort. She brings this reality to bear in her poem without judgment. She is not skewering the people taking refuge in front of their screens. She is not judging them for not doing something more productive, but rather showing that sometimes what we need to do is hibernate too. It is a gorgeous reminder that for all the trappings of humanity, we are just like the other animals in her poem. This ability to bring what some might consider a grim aspect of reality into her poetry is something that Maggie Dietz is often praised for. In one interview with Dietz, critic and journalist Sarah A. Lewis lauded this. She wrote, "Dietz's gaze is alertly trained on the wide world, and her speaker's entanglement in it. Mankind cannot bear much reality," Eliot wrote, "but Dietz's poetry seeks it passionately." The final stanza continues to seek out reality and delivers it with a wallop. The days throw up a close sign around 4. The hapless customer who'd wanted something arrives to find lights out, a bolted door. This final scene feels like those classic Norman Rockwell paintings to me. There's a genuine sense of urban Americana in the idea of throwing up a close sign at 4. Albeit, this is a slice of American life cut with the melancholy of Edward Hopper's work. Of course, what Dietz is really doing here is anthropomorphizing A Winter's Day. That is to say, she's giving it a human quality of ending as though it were a work day, closing up shop as it were. In fact, it's doing what it's always done, and just getting darker so much earlier. The poem ends on the crushing of a final dreg of hope, as some hapless customer, presumably one who's forgotten the time of year, arrives to find that much like everyone else, the shop has gone to ground. The day has come to an end. Like all of humanity, all of nature, the lights are out and the doors are bolted shut. I can think of no finer image than that as a summation of the shock to the system that November is every year. It would be easy to classify November by Maggie Dietz as little more than a complaint with a flourish. However, as with much of her poetry, Maggie Dietz brings a glorious feeling of humanity and camaraderie to a grim month. Yes, every living thing in this poem is fleeing from the cold of winter. But in that collective fleeing, we are all united. Dietz shines a light on the litany of ways that things close up shop for this time of year. Her gorgeous imagery is all at once an homage to October and a damnation of the month that follows it. It is a gorgeous document of seasons changing that manages to be full of beauty without ever sinking into the morass of sentimentality that sometimes plagues romantic poems trying to do the same thing. One critic wrote of her work, "When reading Dietz's poems, one can often sense an aperture widening or constricting as she deftly engages the movement of light and shadow across natural and human cycles." The human and natural cycles here are more of a circle than a Venn diagram. Dietz has shown us that winter affects us all. She has done so at times using humour, using breathtaking imagery, and always with grounded realism. You'd be forgiven for thinking that this poem held little hope, but in her review of the season cycle are many acknowledgements that it is just that, a cycle. And like any time period on Fortune's wheel, November's reign will come to an end too, and spring might just be around the corner. What did you think of the poem? As always, this is my interpretation, but I'd love to hear yours. If you'd like to get in touch with me, there are a few ways to do so. You can reach me directly by email at wordsthatburnpodcast@gmail.com. You can get in touch through the podcast website, www.wordsthatburnpodcast.com. I'm also on Twitter @WordsThatBurn, Instagram @WordsThatBurnPodcast, and TikTok. If you'd like to read the script for this week's podcast, complete with citations and sources, check the Substack link in the description. If you enjoyed this episode or know someone who might, consider sending it to them directly or leaving me a review wherever you listen. Words That Burn is written and produced by me, Benjamin Colloquial. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast once again.